People like him don't belong here." That was what they said out loud in public in front of his wife while they ripped the jacket off Daniel Walker's back like he was nothing. He didn't fight. He didn't shout. He just stood there. And Emily Walker watched the man she loved, a man who had spent years quietly helping strangers, get stripped of the one thing he wore with pride. She pulled out her phone and hit record. She had no idea that video was about to wake up 600 of the most loyal people on Earth. If this story moves you the way it moved me, please subscribe to our channel and follow Daniel's story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The morning of the charity event started like any other Saturday in Red Valley, Montana. The sky was clear. The air smelled like pine and cold mountain wind. A few clouds drifted slow and easy over the peaks in the distance. The kind of clouds that made people stop and breathe a little deeper, remind themselves that life in a small town had its gifts. Daniel Walker was already up before 6. He always was. He had that mechanic's habit of rising with the light, as if his body knew that the day would need him before the day announced itself. He moved quietly through the kitchen in his work boots, careful not to wake Emily, setting the coffee to brew and standing at the window. For a long moment, both hands wrapped around an empty mug, just watching the morning settle in. How was 51 years old? Not tall, not imposing in the way movies make men like him seem. He was average height, broad across the shoulders, from decades of real work. Not gym work, not performance, but the kind of work that comes from crawling under vehicles in January and wrestling engine blocks that haven't moved in 30 years. His hands were rough. His face was weathered in the way that comes from living honestly and not worrying too much about how you looked doing it. He wore the jacket every day. Not because he was making a statement. Not because he wanted people to look at him. He wore it because it was his. Because it meant something. Because 12 years of loyalty and brotherhood and hard choices were stitched into that leather in ways that no one could see from the outside, but that Daniel felt every single time he pulled it across his shoulders and felt it settle around him like something that belonged. It was the Hells Angels jacket. The patches, the colors, the insignia that made strangers decide who he was before he opened his mouth. Emily came downstairs at 7, her hair still loose around her shoulders, and found him leaning against the kitchen counter, reading the newspaper. She poured herself coffee, leaned up and kissed him on the cheek and said, "You look like you're plotting something." He smiled without looking up. "Just reading." "The charity thing starts at 10, she said. "I know." "You sure you want to go? You know how people around here can be." He finally put the paper down and looked at her. There was something steady in his eyes. The kind of steadiness that doesn't come from being tough. It comes from having already made peace with the parts of life you can't control. "I'm not going to stop living my life because somebody might not like how I look," he said. Emily nodded. She'd learned long ago not to argue with that particular tone. It wasn't stubbornness. It was principle. And she respected it even when it scared her. They arrived at the event at 10:15. The charity fundraiser was held in the open plaza downtown, the kind of event that Red Valley threw every year to prove it was a community that cared. There were booths selling homemade jam and baked goods. A local bluegrass band played near the fountain. Kids ran between adults' legs while parents chatted about the upcoming school year and who had won what in the raffle. It was perfectly pleasant. It was exactly the kind of thing that small towns do well when they're trying. For the first 30 minutes, Daniel and Emily walked through it peacefully. He bought her a jar of honey from an older woman at a booth near the edge of the plaza. She bought him a caramel apple. They stood together listening to the band, and he put his arm around her, and she leaned into him, and it was quietly without fanfare, exactly what love looks like after 23 years. That was when the first comment came. Daniel heard it before he registered it. A voicemail confident carrying the easy loudness of a man who was accustomed to rooms clearing for him. Off to their left, near a cluster of tables where local businessmen sat beneath a tent. One of them looking their direction. Not looking. Staring. And saying something to the man beside him. And then both of them laughing. Emily felt Daniel's arm tighten slightly around her. Just slightly. The way a man's body responds before his mind has fully processed that something is wrong. She looked up at him. "What?" "Nothing," he said. "Let's get something to drink." But it wasn't nothing, and she knew it. She glanced toward the tent. 3 men sat there, suits, expensive watches, the particular kind of ease that comes with money and local power. She recognized one of them. Richard Caldwell. His family had been in Red Valley for 4 generations. He owned half the commercial property downtown and sat on the town council. He had the kind of face that was always smiling, which made it difficult to notice when the smile meant something cold. She looked back at Daniel. He was already steering them gently toward the drinks table, his jaw set, his eyes forward. "Daniel," she said quietly. "I heard it," he said. "It doesn't matter." "What did they say?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Doesn't matter, Em." But she watched his face, and she knew that it did matter. Not because Daniel was fragile, he was the least fragile person she had ever known. It mattered because he had spent his entire adult life fighting the assumption that the jacket was all he was. And no matter how many times a man makes peace with that fight, there is always a moment when someone else's cruelty lands differently than it should. They got their drinks and moved to the other side of the plaza. She thought maybe that was the end of it. It wasn't. About 20 minutes later, one of the men from the tent, not Caldwell himself, but one of the others, younger, the kind of young that assumes it's automatically right, appeared near where Daniel and Emily were standing. He was with another man Emily didn't recognize. They were still laughing about something. And when they got close enough, she heard the other one say, clear as anything, "I mean, is that a costume? What is that?" And the younger one, looking directly at Daniel's jacket, said with a smirk, "I think they sell those at Halloween stores now." Daniel did not respond. He didn't even look at them. He took a sip of his drink and turned slightly, angling his body away, the universal physical signal for, "I am not engaging with this." But the younger man wasn't done. "Sweetheart," he said to Emily, using that word the way some men use it as a tool rather than an endearment. "You really walk around with that? Aren't you embarrassed?" Emily looked at him. Her voice was very calm. "I'm going to ask you to walk away," she said. "I'm just saying." The man continued grinning, like he thought this was a perfectly reasonable conversation to be having in public. "People like that don't exactly scream respectable, you know." "Walk away," Emily said again, still calm, like the surface of water just before something breaks through. The man looked at Daniel, who still hadn't turned around. "Buddy, your wife has more spine than you do." Daniel turned then, slowly, and he looked at the man with an expression that Emily had only seen a handful of times in their marriage. Not anger exactly, but something more controlled than anger, something that came from a deeper place, something that said, "I have survived things you cannot imagine, and your opinion of me is the smallest thing in this room." He said nothing. The younger man seemed to expect an argument. The silence threw him. He laughed it off and walked away with his companion, both of them still chuckling. Emily reached over and took Daniel's hand. "You all right?" she asked. "I'm fine," he said, and she almost believed him. They stayed another 40 minutes because Daniel refused to leave. Not out of stubbornness, out of refusal to let someone else's small-mindedness interrupt a day that belonged to them. And then the security officer arrived. He was a big man. Not security in the professional sense, more like a hired presence. The kind of muscle that community events sometimes contract when they want to feel official. He walked toward them with that particular stride, that broadcasting authority before it's earned. His badge was a clip-on. His shirt was too tight across the chest. He stopped in front of Daniel. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to remove that jacket." Daniel looked at him calmly. "No. It's making people uncomfortable." "That's not a reason." "Sir, I have the authority to—" "You don't have the authority to tell me what to wear on a public street," Daniel said. His voice was quiet and flat, not aggressive, factual. "This is a private event. It's a public plaza. You don't have a dress code posted. You don't have a right to." "Sir." The officer stepped closer. "I'm not asking, I'm telling you. People here are families. There are children here. I need you to remove that jacket, or I need you to leave." Emily stepped forward. "What exactly is he doing wrong? He's standing here with his wife drinking lemonade. What rule has he broken?" The officer looked at her, the way some men look at women who ask direct questions. A brief flash of surprise, followed by recalibration into dismissal. "Ma'am, this isn't about rules. This is about atmosphere." "Atmosphere," Emily repeated. "Some people here find the imagery threatening." "He hasn't said a word to anyone," Emily said. "The men who came over and harassed us, and yes, I want to be very clear that it was harassment, they were the ones who approached. He never, ma'am." "Don't ma'am me like I'm overreacting. My husband has done nothing wrong." The officer looked back at Daniel, then made a decision that would follow him for the rest of his life. He reached out. He grabbed the back of Daniel's jacket, actually put his hand on it on the collar and pulled. Not enough to take it off, but enough to make the intention clear, enough to make it physical, enough to make it something other than a conversation. Daniel went very still. That stillness. Emily would describe it later in the video she posted in the interviews that followed in the conversations she had with people who couldn't understand how a man who had spent years riding with the Hells Angels could stand there and not react. That stillness was not weakness. It was the most disciplined thing she had ever witnessed. It was the choice of a man who understood completely, and without sentimentality, that some fights aren't worth having and some battles are won in the quiet. "Take your hand off me," Daniel said. The officer released the jacket. "Now," Daniel said, "I am going to finish my lemonade. I am going to stand here with my wife. And when we are ready, we are going to leave. And you are going to go back to whatever it is you do when you're not putting your hands on people who haven't done anything to you." Someone nearby was already recording. Someone else farther back in the crowd that had begun to gather without anyone noticing had been recording from the moment the security officer walked over. There were actually 3 people with phones out. The officer, flustered now, his authority publicly undermined by the most composed man in the plaza, began telling people to step back. People stepped back. But the phone stayed up. Richard Caldwell watched from the tent. Emily saw him watching. He did not move to intervene. He picked up his glass and took a slow drink and continued watching like it was something on television. That was the moment Emily felt something shift inside her. Not toward anger, though. Anger was there. Toward purpose. Toward a cold and clarifying certainty that she was going to do something about this, and that she was going to do it in a way that couldn't be argued with or dismissed as the complaint of a biker's wife. They left 10 minutes later. Walked to the truck in the parking lot without hurrying. Daniel held her hand the whole way. The engine started on the first turn. He pulled out of the lot without burning rubber, without any performance of frustration. It was 5 blocks before either of them said anything. "You okay?" Emily asked. "Yeah." A pause. "I'm okay." Another 2 blocks. "Daniel." "Yeah." "You should have yelled at them." He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Yeah, you should have made a scene, said something, anything." He looked straight ahead. Would it have helped? She thought about it. No. Then what would have been the point? The point is that somebody should have said something. They can't just do that. They can't just decide you don't belong somewhere because of what you're wearing and then put hands on you. That's not... She stopped, looked out the window. That's not how this is supposed to work. I know, he said. I recorded some of it. He glanced at her. How much? The officer, the grab, most of what he said. Somebody else was recording too. I could see their phone. He was quiet for a moment. Okay. I want to post it. Another moment of quiet. Longer this time. I know what you're going to say. I'm not embarrassed. It's not about that. It's about what happens after you put something like that out there. People take it and run with it, and it becomes something you didn't intend. Daniel. She turned to look at him fully. A man put his hands on you in public and told you that you don't belong in your own community because of your jacket, because of who you are, and the people who could have said something just stood there and watched. Her voice dropped not with anger, but with something heavier. How many other people have they done that to? How many times have people like you people who do good quiet things that nobody sees been treated like criminals in public and had no one say a word for them? He didn't answer right away. You want to put it up, he said finally. I want to put it up. Then do it, he said. But it's your call, Em. Whatever comes after, it's yours to carry. It's ours, she said. He nodded once, eyes still on the road. She posted the video that night. She didn't write a long caption. She didn't frame it with outrage or try to direct how people should feel about it. She just wrote what had happened in plain sentences with no editorializing. The date, the event, the name of the town, what had been said, what had been done, who she knew to be responsible. Then she put her phone down and went to bed. She woke up at 2 a.m. because her phone was buzzing too many times to sleep through. She picked it up and stared at the screen for a full 30 seconds, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The video had been viewed 400,000 times. By 6 a.m, when Daniel got up to start coffee, it was at 1.3 million. By noon, it had crossed 3. Comments were coming in faster than she could read them. From people she had never heard of in places she had never been. From veterans. From mechanics. From women who said their husbands were like Daniel. From people who knew nothing about motorcycle clubs, but who understood viscerally and immediately what it looked like when someone's dignity was dismissed as inconvenient. Daniel sat at the kitchen table and watched her scroll through the comments for a while. Then he got up, poured himself more coffee and said, I'm going to the shop. I've got a transmission to finish. Daniel. It's okay, Em. He kissed her on the forehead. You did the right thing. Let it run. He put on the jacket and he went to work. 600 miles away, in a house outside Reno, Nevada. A 63-year-old man named William Carter was sitting in front of a laptop at his kitchen table when his daughter sent him the link. He watched the video once. Then he watched it again. Then he watched it a third time very slowly. Pausing at the moment, the security officer's hand reached out and grabbed Daniel Walker's collar. He sat there for a long time after the third viewing. His coffee went cold. The clock on the wall ticked. His dog came over and put her head on his knee, and he scratched her ears absently, not looking down. William Carter was 63 years old, and had the kind of face that collected history, a broad forehead mapped with lines, eyes that had seen enough to stop being surprised, but hadn't yet stopped caring. His beard was mostly white now. He moved more carefully than he used to, the consequence of a knee that hadn't healed right after an accident 3 years ago. People who didn't know him sometimes assumed, because of his size and his colors and his reputation, that he was the kind of man who solved problems with his fists. They were wrong. William Carter solved problems with patience and intelligence, and a talent for knowing with absolute precision what a moment required. And sitting at his kitchen table in Reno, with his cold coffee and his dog and his daughter's text still glowing on his phone, he knew exactly what this moment required. He had known Daniel Walker for 11 years. Not closely, they weren't the kind of men who called each other often. But the Hells Angels wasn't the kind of brotherhood that required constant contact to be real. It was the kind of brotherhood that meant something deeper. When one person fell, the others noticed. When one person was treated as less than human, the others took that personally. Not because of a code written down somewhere, because of something that lived in the chest, that had no official name, but that every person who had ever truly stood beside another person in a hard moment understood completely. William picked up his phone. He called a man in Phoenix. Just to talk, he said. Then he called a man in Salt Lake City. Just to check in, he said. Then a man in Denver. Then a man in Billings. I didn't say come. He didn't organize. He didn't command. He just talked the way brothers talk, directly, honestly, without drama. And in each of those conversations, the same thing happened. The other person on the line went quiet for a moment after William mentioned what he'd seen. And then they said some version of the same thing. When are you leaving? By that evening, William had made 16 calls. By the next morning, the word had spread in that organic and invisible way that things spread between people who have spent years building trust, not through social media, not through public announcements, but through a network of relationships that most of the world never sees and therefore tends to underestimate. Daniel Walker was still at his shop on Tuesday when his phone rang with a number he didn't immediately recognize. He wiped his hands on a shop rag and answered, "Walker." "Daniel." The voice was calm, unhurried, weighted with the kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself. "It's William Carter." Daniel straightened slowly. "William. I saw the video." "A beat." "Yeah. I watched it 3 times, William said. "It's they're making a bigger deal out of it than it needs to be," Daniel said. "Emily didn't mean for it to blow up like this." "But it did," William said. "Yeah. And those men, the one on television, Caldwell, he hasn't apologized." "No. He's not going to apologize, Daniel. Not on his own. Not because someone posted a video and people got upset online. Men like that don't apologize because they feel bad. They apologize because they have no other choice." Daniel said nothing. "You remember," William said, "what I told you when you first came into the Brotherhood 11 years ago." "You told me a lot of things," Daniel said. "I told you that the jacket is a promise, not to us, to yourself, that you will carry yourself with honor, and that when you can't, when the world knocks you down or strips something from you, you won't have to stand back up alone." The shop was very quiet. Somewhere outside, a truck passed on the main road. The fluorescent light above Daniel's workbench hummed its usual note. "William," he said carefully, "what are you planning?" "Nothing dramatic," William said. "Nothing that will cause any problems. I just think that certain people in Red Valley have formed an impression of what you are, and I think it would be useful for them to understand what you actually are." Another beat. "How many people are you talking about?" Daniel asked. "Enough," William said simply. "William." "Daniel." The voice was gentle, but it did not bend. "Your wife posted that video because she wanted people to see the truth. We're just going to help them see it a little more clearly." The line was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to do this," Daniel said. "I know," William said. "That's exactly why we're doing it." Emily found Daniel standing in the middle of the shop after the call, not doing anything, just standing there with his phone in his hand and an expression she couldn't quite read. "Who was that?" she asked. He looked up. "William Carter," he said. She waited. "He says they're coming," Daniel said. "Who's coming?" He looked at her for a long moment. And then, for the first time since Saturday, she saw something break open in his face. Not grief, not anger, but something much more complicated and much more human. Something that lived in the place between pride and humility. Something that arrived in the chest like a fist and forced a man to breathe differently for a moment. "Brothers," he said. Emily held his gaze. "How many?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "Enough," he said. And she understood in that moment that the story had changed. That whatever this was, this thing that had started with a mocking comment and a security officer's hand and a video that 3 million strangers had watched, it was no longer just about Daniel Walker and a leather jacket. It was about something older than any of them. About the kind of loyalty that doesn't make headlines until it shows up at your door. About the kind of brotherhood that exists, not because it's convenient or because it benefits anyone in particular, but because some people somewhere a long time ago made a decision that no one who wore their colors would ever stand alone in the face of contempt. Richard Caldwell went on television that same evening. Emily watched it on the kitchen TV, while Daniel sat at the table behind her eating the dinner he'd reheated twice, while she was on the phone with reporters. Caldwell was composed, polished. He had the practiced ease of a man who had spent years being the most important person in every room he entered, and who had never had serious reason to believe that would change. "People sometimes feel strongly about their choices," he said to the interviewer, with a kind of patient reasonableness that made Emily's jaw tighten. "And I respect that. But the community also has a responsibility to maintain certain standards at events that are meant for families. I think reasonable people can understand that." "But your security officer physically touched Mr. Walker," the interviewer said. "There are people saying that crossed a line." Caldwell shrugged just slightly. "I wasn't there for every moment. I can't speak to every individual interaction. What I can say is that we had a duty to the families at that event, and our staff was doing their best to honor that duty. And Mr. Walker's jacket specifically. I think people should not be surprised, Caldwell said carefully, when society responds with caution to symbols that have historically been associated with a certain kind of lifestyle. Emily turned off the television. She stood with her back to the blank screen for a moment. Then she turned and looked at Daniel. He just called you a certain kind of lifestyle on television, she said. I heard, Daniel said. He's not going to apologize. No. He's not even going to admit anything was wrong. No. Daniel. He set down his fork. His voice was quiet and tired, but underneath the tiredness was something solid and unshakable. You know what William said to me tonight? He said that my value isn't measured by whether Richard Caldwell admits he was wrong. He said my value is already decided. By the things I've done. By the people whose lives I've been part of. By the years of work that nobody filmed, and nobody wrote articles about, and nobody stood up and applauded. He picked up his fork again. Richard Caldwell can say whatever he wants. It doesn't change what I am. Emily looked at her husband for a long time. Then she sat down across from him. And she said very quietly, I know. And she thought about the veterans whose motorcycles Daniel had fixed for free men who came in barely holding it together. Who needed a functioning bike not just for transportation, but for the particular kind of freedom that riding provides, and who had no money and pride that made asking for help feel impossible. She thought about the family 3 streets over, whose heat had gone out 2 winters ago, and how Daniel had shown up on a Saturday morning with parts and tools, and hadn't left until it was fixed, and had told them it was no charge, because he'd had extra parts lying around, which was not true, but which preserved their dignity. She thought about every quiet, unremarkable, unrecorded act of human decency that her husband had performed over 23 years, and she understood with complete and sudden clarity why 600 people were getting on their motorcycles to come to Red Valley, Montana. It wasn't about the jacket. It was about the truth of a man's life. A truth that had been publicly dismissed by people who had decided they knew the story before they'd read a single page. She looked at the blank television screen. And then she looked back at her husband. And she thought they have no idea what's coming. Outside, the Montana night settled over Red Valley like a held breath. The mountains stood and distant against the sky. The streets were quiet. The businesses were closed. The town was doing what small towns do, retreating into the comfortable certainty of its own familiar patterns, its own established hierarchies, its own assumptions about who belonged and who didn't. It had no idea. In Phoenix, engines were being checked. In Salt Lake City, routes were being mapped. In Denver, in Billings, in Reno, in places that Red Valley had never thought about and could not have imagined thinking about it. Men and women who understood the meaning of a leather jacket were making quiet preparations. Not for war. Not for confrontation. Not for any of the things that the people of Red Valley, if they had known, would have assumed. For something simpler. And something much more powerful. They were coming to stand beside a brother. And nothing that Richard Caldwell had said on television. Nothing that any security officer with a clip-on badge could do. And nothing that the comfortable certainties of a small Montana town had prepared it to believe, none of it was going to stop them. Daniel Walker finished his dinner. He washed his plate. He put on the jacket out of habit to take the trash out to the curb. He stood in the driveway for a moment under the cold Montana sky and looked up at the stars, which were thick and clear and enormous, the way they only get at altitude far from city lights, in places where the world still remembers that it is mostly darkness with light scattered through it like grace. He went back inside. He said goodnight to Emily. He went to bed. He slept. Because whatever was coming, and he didn't yet know the shape of it, didn't know the numbers, didn't know that by Thursday night there would be phone calls crossing state lines involving hundreds of people. Whatever it was, Daniel Walker had already decided something important. He had decided that he was not defined by the moment in the plaza. He was not defined by the laughter. He was not defined by the officer's hand on his collar, or by Caldwell's smooth dismissal on television, or by the comfortable cruelty of men who had spent their lives deciding other people's worth. He was defined by the jacket. Not by what other people thought the jacket meant. by what he knew it meant, by the promise it carried, by the years he had worn it and what he had done in those years, by the fact that tonight while he slept, hundreds of people who understood that promise were checking their engines and mapping their routes and making arrangements and doing all of the small, unglamorous, practical things that real loyalty requires before it arrives. The jacket was a promise, and a promise, when it is made by the right people, does not break. The night was quiet in Red Valley, but not for long. Emily didn't sleep past 4 that Wednesday morning. She lay in the dark, listening to Daniel breathe beside her. Slow, even the sleep of a man who had genuinely made his peace with something, and she stared at the ceiling and tried to do the same. She couldn't. Her mind kept running back over the same territory, the same loop, the plaza, the laughter, the officer's hand on the collar, the television, Caldwell's face, that careful smile, those careful words. People should not be surprised when society responds with caution. She picked up her phone. The video had 4.1 million views. She put the phone face down on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling for another 10 minutes. Then she got up, went downstairs, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open and her hands wrapped around the mug, and began reading. The comments had long since stopped being something she could follow individually. There were tens of thousands of them. But she read them the way you read a crowd, not word by word, but as a shape, as a temperature. And what she felt coming off that screen was something she hadn't expected. Not just outrage, not just sympathy, something angrier and more specific. Something that said, this has happened to us too. This has happened to people we love. And nobody said anything. A woman in Georgia wrote, "My father was a veteran who rode for 30 years, and the way people treated him in public made me ashamed to live in this country sometimes. He never said a word. He just kept going. Your husband reminds me of him." A man in Oregon wrote, "I'm a retired firefighter. I know men like Daniel. They're the ones who show up when everyone else stays home." A mechanic from Kentucky wrote, "I fixed a car for free last month for a family that couldn't make rent." Nobody filmed it. Nobody wrote about it. That's not why you do it. That's the whole point. That's the whole thing these people don't understand. Emily read that last one 3 times. Then she heard Daniel's boots on the stairs. He came into the kitchen, already dressed, jacket on, looking like a man who intended to have a normal day, regardless of what the internet thought about him. He poured coffee. He looked over her shoulder at the screen for exactly 2 seconds. Then he kissed the top of her head and said, "Don't read them all. You'll be in that chair until Thursday. Some of them are really something," she said. "Good something or bad something. Both. Mostly good." He nodded, drank his coffee standing up, set the mug in the sink. "I've got a Silverado coming in at 8. Trans is shot. Probably going to be an all-day thing." Daniel. "Yeah. William Carter called you last night." "I know. I was there." "I mean, are you going to call him back? Find out more about what he said? How many people, what the plan is, what?" He turned around, patient but clear. "William knows what he's doing. He's been doing this a lot longer than either of us. If he wants me to know something, he'll tell me. Until then, I'm going to fix a transmission." She wanted to argue. She didn't. "Okay," she said. "Lock the front door when you go out," he said. "I don't know who's been watching the video in this town, but I don't want anyone coming to the house." That small instruction landed in her chest like a stone dropping into water. She hadn't thought about that. That the video, which had seemed like a thing that existed out there in the abstract in the world beyond Red Valley, could come back around. That it could create problems here where they actually lived. "You think someone might?" she asked. "I think Richard Caldwell has friends," Daniel said. "And I think some of them might not enjoy seeing their friend on the wrong end of 4 million views." He looked at her steadily. "Just lock the door." He left. She sat for a while after the sound of his truck faded. Then she got up, walked to the front door, and locked it. The morning passed. The way mornings do when you're waiting for something you can't name yet, slowly and with too much awareness of time. Emily answered emails from journalists. Not all of them. She chose the ones that seemed genuine, the ones that seemed to be trying to understand, rather than just trying to have an opinion. A woman from a newspaper in Missoula. A producer from a documentary company in New York who said she'd been working on a piece about public dignity and community standards and wondered if Emily would be willing to talk. Emily told the producer she'd think about it. She didn't think Caldwell's people would be quiet much longer. She was right. At 11:15 her phone rang. The caller ID said Red Valley Town Offices. She answered. The voice on the other end was a man who identified himself as an assistant to the town council. I was professionally pleasant in the way that people are when they've been told to be professionally pleasant while delivering something unpleasant. He said that the council was aware of the video and of the attention it had attracted, and that they wanted Emily and Daniel to know that they took the matter very seriously and would be conducting an internal review of the procedures at the charity event. An internal review, Emily said. That's correct. Conducted by the same council that Richard Caldwell sits on. A brief pause. The council takes all community concerns very seriously. So that's a yes. Mrs. Walker, we want to resolve this in a way that... My husband was physically grabbed at a community event because of what he was wearing, Emily said. Her voice was steady, precise. He was told he didn't belong there. He was mocked in public by men who have never spoken to him, who know nothing about him, and who made a decision about who he was based on a jacket. And now you're calling to tell me that the people who are friends with the man responsible for that are going to conduct an internal review. Another pause. Longer. Mrs. Walker, we understand your frustration. I don't think you do, she said. But I think you're going to. She hung up. Her hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear. From something else. From the particular physical sensation of having said exactly what you meant to say clearly, and without flinching, and knowing that it would have consequences, and not caring. She sat down. Took a breath. Opened her laptop. She had 3 new emails from people she didn't know. 2 were from residents of Red Valley, people she had never met, or barely recognized, who had written to say they were sorry about what had happened, that they'd seen the video, that they didn't think what the security officer did was right. One was from a woman who said she'd lived in Red Valley for 20 years, and that she knew Richard Caldwell personally, and that she was ashamed of what he'd said on television. The 4th email was different. It was from a man named Marcus Webb, and it took Emily a moment to place the name. Then she remembered Marcus Webb was a local reporter. Not from the Missoula paper local, Red Valley local. The kind of reporter who wrote about town council meetings and high school sports and the opening of new businesses on Main Street. He was 28, earnest, and had until this week probably never written anything that anyone outside of Glacier County had read. His email said, Mrs. Walker, I know you've been contacted by a lot of media. I'm not going to pretend I'm in their league. I'm a local reporter, and I've covered this town for 3 years. I know things about Richard Caldwell that I've never been able to print, because I've never had a story big enough to attach them to. I think I might have one now. Can we talk? Emily read the email twice. Then she typed back, yes. When he responded in 4 minutes tomorrow morning. Your kitchen or mine? She wrote mine. 9 o'clock. Come alone. He wrote back, yes, ma'am. She sat with that for a moment. A 28-year-old local reporter with something he'd never been able to print. She didn't know if it was useful. She didn't know if it was relevant. But something in the directness of his message, the absence of performance, the specificity of things I've never been able to print. Something about that felt real in a way that the calls from national producers didn't quite. She was about to close the laptop when her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize with a Montana area code. It said, Mrs. Walker, my name is Laura Bennett. I'm a chief investigator with the State Civil Rights Division. I've been made aware of the incident at the charity event on Saturday. I'd like to speak with you at your earliest convenience. This is not an informal inquiry. Emily stared at the text for a long time. This is not an informal inquiry. She wrote back, I'm available this afternoon. Laura Bennett called 20 minutes later. She had a clipped, efficient voice, the voice of someone who spent her days separating what mattered from what didn't, and had become very good at it. She asked Emily to walk her through what happened on Saturday. Not the online version, not the video. The full thing beginning to end, including what was said before the camera came out. Emily told her everything. The men from the tent. The word sweetheart. The security officer. The grab. Caldwell watching from the distance. All of it. Laura Bennett listened without interrupting. When Emily finished, there was a brief silence. "Mrs. Walker," she said, "I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to answer it directly. Was there anything about your husband's behavior at that event? Anything at all that could reasonably be interpreted as threatening or disruptive?" "No," Emily said. "He said nothing to any of the men who approached him. He said nothing until the security officer told him to remove his jacket. At which point, he said no calmly and explained that it was a public space and there was no posted dress code. And the officer then made physical contact. Yes. Unprovoked. Completely. Another brief silence. "I'm going to be honest with you," Laura Bennett said. "What you're describing, if it is as you say, is a clear violation of his civil rights. The physical contact alone is potentially actionable. The language used the characterization of him as someone who doesn't belong at an event in a public space because of a symbol associated with a protected form of association that has legal weight." Emily pressed her hand flat against the kitchen table. She needed something solid. "What does that mean practically?" she asked. "It means we'll be opening a formal investigation," Laura Bennett said. "It means that Richard Caldwell and the organization behind that event will need to respond to specific questions. It means that the security officer will need to provide his account of what happened." A pause. "It also means, Mrs. Walker, that if your husband is willing to speak with us, his cooperation would be significant." "He'll cooperate," Emily said. She hadn't asked him. She knew. "Good." A brief pause. "One more thing. The video. There are 2 other recordings that we've been able to identify from social media. We'll be requesting all 3 as evidence." "Okay," Emily said. "Thank you for your time, Mrs. Walker. We'll be in touch." The line went dead. Emily sat in the quiet kitchen for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Daniel's shop. He picked up on the 3rd ring, with the sound of the garage in the background, the particular orchestra of compressed air and metal that was the soundtrack of his working life. "Yeah," he said. "I just got off the phone with a state civil rights investigator," Emily said. A beat. "Tell me," he said. She told him. He listened the same way she'd watched him listen his whole life, without interrupting, without reacting outwardly, taking it in and processing it somewhere internal where she couldn't quite see. When she finished, he said, "Laura Bennett. You know her?" "No. But I know the Civil Rights Division. They don't open formal investigations lightly. They've got limited staff and a lot of cases. If she's calling you the day after a video goes up, someone made a decision that this one was worth the resources." "Is that good?" Emily asked. "It means it's real," Daniel said. "It means it's not just people being upset online. It means there's a process now." "She said she needs you to cooperate." "Of course." "Daniel." Emily hesitated. "She also said that what Caldwell did might be that it might have legal weight, that there might be consequences for him specifically." A longer pause. "Good," Daniel said. And then immediately, "Not because I want to see him hurt, but because consequences are what make things mean something. Without them, an apology is just noise." She heard something shift in the background, the clank of a tool being set down. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," he said. "I've got a transmission to get back to." "Daniel." "I'm fine, Em." His voice was quieter than usual, more careful. "I'm just processing." "Take your time." "I will." A pause. "Call me if anything else happens." "I will." "And Em." "Yeah." "Thank you," he said. "For posting it, for making the calls, for not letting it just go away." She swallowed something that had moved suddenly into her throat. "I love you," she said. "I know," he said. "Same." He hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand for a long time. It was not yet noon on Wednesday. By the following Sunday morning, 600 motorcycles would roll into Red Valley. But right now, in this kitchen, in this quiet, The machinery of justice was beginning to move in ways that Richard Caldwell had not accounted for when he had sat beneath his tent on Saturday and watched a man get grabbed by the collar and decided it was someone else's problem. That afternoon, Caldwell called a press conference. Emily watched it on her laptop with a cup of tea she forgot to drink. He stood at a podium outside the town council building with 2 other council members flanking him like decorative columns, all of them projecting the particular stillness of powerful men who have decided that the best response to being caught is to reframe the frame. "I want to speak directly to the community today," Caldwell said. "The events of this past Saturday have generated a great deal of conversation. Some of that conversation has been productive. Some of it, I'm sad to say, has been divisive and has misrepresented what happened in ways that I think do a disservice to the good people of Red Valley." Emily leaned forward. "Our event was designed to celebrate this community, to bring families together in a spirit of generosity and civic pride. Our security staff made decisions in the moment that they felt were appropriate to maintaining a safe environment for children and families. Whether those decisions were handled perfectly, I'll be the first to say that human beings make mistakes, and we can always do better." He paused, looked at the camera with the expression of a man being very reasonable. "But I also want to say this. The men and women who volunteer to keep our community events safe deserve our support, not our condemnation. And I think it would be a shame if the actions of one person, or the particular choices one person makes in how they present themselves in public, were to overshadow the real work this community does every single day." Emily closed the laptop. She didn't close it gently. The phrase landed on her like a hand to the chest. The particular choices one person makes in how they present themselves in public. She stood up from the table, walked to the window, stood there. He had done it again. He had taken Daniel Walker, a man who had spent 12 years in Brotherhood, who had repaired motorcycles for veterans who couldn't afford it, who had fixed a family's heat in January because they had nowhere else to turn, who had done 10,000 things that no camera had ever recorded, and he had reduced him to a choice about presentation. As if the jacket were vanity, as if it were costume, as if it were not the most authentic thing Daniel owned. She stood at the window for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and texted Marcus Webb, 9 o'clock tomorrow. Don't be late. He wrote back instantly, I won't be. That night, Daniel came home from the shop, and they sat together at the dinner table, and she told him about Caldwell's press conference. He listened. He ate. He didn't say anything immediately. Then he said, he's scared. She looked up. What? Men who aren't scared don't hold press conferences, Daniel said. Men who aren't scared don't stand at podiums with 2 other people flanking them like they need witnesses. He took another bite. He knows something is coming. He just doesn't know what shape it takes. Are you scared? Emily asked. He thought about it. Actually thought about it, which was one of the things she loved about him. He didn't give automatic answers to real questions. No, he said finally. I'm tired. I'm tired of being a story. I'm tired of strangers deciding what my life means. He set down his fork. But no, not scared. William hasn't called back, she said. He will. When? Daniel picked up his fork again. When he's ready. That's how William works. The call came at 9:40 that evening. Daniel was in the living room. Emily was washing dishes. She heard his voice change, not in content, but in register. There's a way a man speaks to someone whose opinion genuinely matters to him that's different from ordinary conversation. She turned off the faucet and listened without trying to listen. She heard, how many? A pause. Then, are you serious? Another pause. Then very quietly, William, that's... He stopped, started again. You don't have to. Whatever William said next, it was long. Daniel stood in the living room doorway and listened, and his face did something she hadn't seen it do in years. It opened. Like a door pushed from inside. Like the face of a man who had been carrying something alone for a very long time and had just unexpectedly been offered help. Okay, Daniel said finally. Okay, Sunday morning. A response. I'll be there, Daniel said. Tell them thank you. I don't... He stopped, cleared his throat once. Tell them I said thank you. He lowered the phone. He stood in the doorway for a moment with his back to her. She dried her hands on the dish towel and walked over and stood beside him. "How many?" she asked. He turned to look at her. 600, he said. The number sat between them in the quiet kitchen air like a living thing. 600 riders, he said. From 11 states. They're coming Sunday morning. William says they'll arrive at sunrise. Emily felt something move through her that she didn't have a name for. Not surprise exactly. William had told her something was coming. But 600 was a different kind of something. 600 was not a gesture. 600 was not a statement. 600 was a demonstration not of anger or threat, but of scale. Of the simple, overwhelming, unanswerable arithmetic of people who had decided that one of their own mattered. "Daniel," she said, "Yeah. This is going to change things. I know. For this town. For Caldwell. For—" "I know," he said again. She looked at him. I was looking straight ahead, at something past the wall, past the town, past whatever small version of this story he'd been carrying in his chest since Saturday. "Are you okay with it?" she asked. He was quiet for a long moment. "You know what I keep thinking about," he said finally. "What? Every guy whose jacket I fixed for free. Every kid whose family I helped out because they couldn't afford the shop rate. Every veteran who came in barely holding together, and I just worked on their bike and didn't say much and let them talk or not talk whatever they needed." He paused. "I never told anyone about those things. Not because I was ashamed. Because that's not why you do them. You do them because it's right, and because you can, and because someone has to." "I know," Emily said. "But those people know," he said. "That's the thing. I didn't tell anyone, but they know. And apparently—" He stopped, swallowed once. "Apparently it gets around even when you don't say a word. Even when you think nobody's keeping track." She took his hand. 600 people are keeping track, she said. He looked down at her hand in his. And then he laughed a real laugh, short and surprised, the kind that escapes before a man can decide whether it's appropriate. "Yeah," he said. "I guess they are." Thursday arrived with the sound of Emily's phone ringing at 7 in the morning. She didn't recognize the number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. "Mrs. Walker." Male voice. Smooth. The particular smoothness of someone who had rehearsed being smooth. "My name is Aaron Park. I'm Richard Caldwell's attorney." Emily sat up straighter in bed. "I'm listening," she said. "Mr. Caldwell wanted me to reach out to you directly to express his regret about the way Saturday's events unfolded. He wants you to know that he takes the matter very seriously and that he has no desire to see this escalate further." "He wants it to go away," Emily said. A brief pause. "He wants to find a resolution." "What kind of resolution?" "He'd be open to a meeting, private, just the two of you and perhaps your husband, to discuss." "No," Emily said. Silence. "Mrs. Walker, no private meeting," she said. "No quiet resolution, no arrangement that happens out of sight where we agree to be satisfied and he gets to keep his reputation." She kept her voice even. "Your client went on television and called my husband a lifestyle. He stood in public and watched a man be physically grabbed and he did nothing. He held a press conference yesterday and implied that Daniel was responsible for his own humiliation because of how he chose to present himself." A pause. "If Richard Caldwell is sorry, he can say so publicly. In the same forum where he said the other things. In front of the same people who heard him." Another silence. Longer. "I'll pass that along," the attorney said. "You do that," Emily said. She hung up. She sat on the edge of the bed in the early morning and felt her heart beating harder than usual and breathed through it slow and deliberate. Then she went downstairs and told Daniel. He was already in the kitchen, already dressed, already on his second coffee. He listened to the whole thing without changing expression. "Good," he said when she finished. "Just good. What else is there?" He looked at her. "You said the right thing. You said what needed to be said." "His attorney's going to come back with something," Emily said. "Some kind of counteroffer. Some kind of arrangement." "Let him," Daniel said. "We'll deal with it when it comes." He poured her a coffee. set it on the counter in front of her. Then he picked up his own mug and looked at the wall for a moment. "Sunday's 4 days away." "Away," he said. "I know. A lot can happen in 4 days." "I know," she said. "Daniel." "I'm going to the shop," he said. "I've got 2 vehicles waiting and a guy coming in at noon for an estimate." He looked at her. "Whatever happens between now and Sunday, we keep going." "Okay, we keep going like it's a normal week." "It's not a normal week," she said. "I know that." His voice was quiet. "But if we stop living our normal life because of this, then they've already changed something. And I don't want anything about us to change because of them." She nodded. "Okay," she said. He picked up his jacket from the hook by the door and pulled it on in that particular way. He had that automatic, unself-conscious motion that he'd done 10,000 times. That meant nothing to him as gesture and everything to him as truth. He went to work. Emily turned to her laptop. Marcus Webb arrived at 9 o'clock exactly, which told her something. He was younger than he looked in his byline photo, which was already pretty young, and he had the particular energy of someone who had been sitting on something for a long time and had finally been handed permission to talk about it. He sat down at the kitchen table. She put coffee in front of him. He wrapped both hands around the mug the same way Daniel always did, and she noticed that and felt something soften slightly. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. "You said you had information about Caldwell," she said. "What kind?" No preamble. He seemed to appreciate that. 3 years ago, he said, there was a family, the Moores. They owned a property on the east side of town, had owned it for 2 generations. Caldwell's company made them an offer. They said no. 6 months later, they were cited for 11 zoning violations. Most of which, if you look at the records, weren't violations at all, or were violations that every other property in that zone also had and was never cited for. He looked at her steadily. They ended up selling to Caldwell's company for 40% below market. Emily held his gaze. "You couldn't run that." "I had no anchor, no case big enough. You can't run a story about a suspicious zoning complaint without something to attach it to. It reads like a grudge or a conspiracy theory." He leaned forward slightly. "But now there's a civil rights investigation being opened into this same man's behavior at a public event. Now there's a video with 4 million views. Now there's a story." "There might be more," Emily said. "I know," he said. "I've been making calls since Monday. The Moores weren't the only ones." The weight of that landed fully. She looked at him, this 28-year-old reporter who had been sitting in a small-town newsroom, watching a man operate with impunity for 3 years and waiting with the kind of patience that young people rarely get credit for the moment when the story became big enough to hold what he knew. "Write it," she said. "I need more on the record," he said. "I need the Moores to talk. I need at least 2 other people who'll go on record." "Can you get them?" "I think Saturday changed some people's math," he said simply. "I think seeing what he did in public on video made some people willing to say things they'd been keeping quiet." She nodded. "Then write it." He pulled out a notebook. Old-fashioned, spiral-bound, half-filled with cramped handwriting. "Tell me about Daniel," he said. "Not the jacket, not the club. Tell me who he is." And Emily Walker, at her kitchen table on a Thursday morning, 4 days before 600 motorcycles would roll into her town, told Marcus Webb about her husband, about the veterans, about the family with the broken heat, about the 12 years and the loyalty and the quiet and the jacket, and what it meant to the people who understood what it meant. She talked for an hour and a half. Marcus Webb wrote without stopping. When she finally finished, he closed the notebook and looked at her. "He sounds like someone this town should be proud of," he said. "He is," Emily said. "They just don't know it yet." "No," she said. "They don't." She looked toward the window. 4 days. The clock was moving. The investigation was open. The attorney would call back. The press conference footage was still circulating. The video was still climbing. And somewhere in 11 states engines were being checked and routes were being mapped, and 600 people were getting ready to drive through the night to stand beside a man they believed in. "They're going to know," she said quietly. "Very soon, they're going to know exactly who he is." Marcus Webb stood up, tucked the notebook in his jacket pocket. "Mrs. Walker," he said at the door. For what it's worth. I don't think this is just about Daniel anymore. I think this became about something bigger the moment Caldwell went on television and called it a lifestyle. Emily opened the door for him. "I know," she said. He left. She closed the door. She stood in the entry hall for a moment, her hand still on the doorknob, and she thought about Richard Caldwell sitting in his office somewhere in this town, watching the video views climb and listening to his attorney's report, and calculating with the cold arithmetic of a man who had always been able to calculate his way out of consequences, how much this was going to cost him. She thought about him looking at the number on his television on Saturday. 4 million. She thought about how different that number was going to look by Sunday. She went back to the kitchen. She opened her laptop. She had work to do. Marcus Webb's article ran on Friday morning. Emily saw it at 6:15, before she'd finished her first cup of coffee, before Daniel had come downstairs, before the day had fully decided what it was going to be. The headline was simple and direct, the way the best local journalism always is. "Who is Daniel Walker, the man behind the jacket, Red Valley judged?" She read it twice. Then she sat very still with her hands around her mug. Marcus had done something she hadn't expected. He hadn't written a puff piece. He hadn't written an outrage piece. He had written a portrait careful, specific, unhurried of a man who had lived quietly in this town for 20 years and done things that the town had never bothered to notice. The veterans, the families, the late nights at the shop when someone called in a panic because their car had broken down and they had no money, and months. He told me the first time that it was between veterans. I asked him when he served. He said he hadn't. He just said some debts don't need a reason. I had the Moore family. On the record, all of it. The zoning violations, the forced sale, the 40% below market. He'd gotten 2 other families who had similar stories, both of them willing to be named, both of them having apparently decided that Saturday's video had changed their calculation about what silence was costing them. And at the end of the article, one careful factual paragraph about the civil rights investigation that Laura Bennett's office had opened. No editorializing, just the facts. The investigation was open. Caldwell's organization had been notified. The 3 videos from Saturday's event were being treated as evidence. Emily forwarded the link to Daniel's phone. She heard his boots on the stairs 45 seconds later, which meant he'd been awake, and the notification had reached him in bed. He came into the kitchen already looking at his phone. She watched his face as he read. He gave nothing away. That was the infuriating and wonderful thing about him. But she had been married to him long enough to read the small things. The slight tightening around his eyes when he got to the Thomas Greer quote. The way his jaw shifted almost imperceptibly at the paragraph about the Moores. He set the phone face down on the table. He got the Moores to talk, Daniel said. He got 2 other families too, Emily said. A pause. Caldwell is going to be furious. Good, Emily said. Daniel looked at her. Something moved in his expression, a flicker of something that was almost amusement, almost admiration, almost the recognition that his wife was a particular kind of person that he had always known she was, but that the rest of the world was only now beginning to understand. You told him to write it, Daniel said. It wasn't a question. I told him to write it, she confirmed. He nodded slowly, picked up his coffee. Then it's done. It's just starting, she said. I know. He looked at the table. I know it is. By 9 o'clock, the article had been shared 14,000 times on social media. By noon, he had been picked up by 3 regional outlets and 1 national news aggregator. By 3 in the afternoon, the Missoula paper that had already been covering the story ran a follow-up that pulled directly from Marcus's reporting on the Moore family. Caldwell's attorney called Emily again at 10:30. She let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was 12 seconds long and said that Mr. Caldwell was reconsidering his position and would like to arrange a conversation at her earliest convenience. She texted back, My earliest convenience is after Sunday. We can talk then. No response came. Daniel was at the shop. He called her at 1 in the afternoon, which he almost never did during work hours. How bad is it? He asked, meaning the article, meaning the attention, meaning all of it. It depends on what you mean by bad, she said. For Caldwell. His organization lost 2 corporate sponsors this morning, she said. I've been tracking it. A construction company and a local insurance agency both posted on social media that they were withdrawing support pending the investigation's outcome. A pause. Who told you that? Marcus. He's been watching. That kid is sharp, Daniel said. He's been waiting 3 years for this story, Emily said. Sharp doesn't cover it. Another pause. I need to tell you something. She sat down. What? Some of the guys guys I've known for years. Customers, people I waved to at the grocery store. They've been coming by the shop today. Not to get work done. Just to come by. What do you mean just to come by? I mean, Tom Halsey stopped in at 8:30 this morning and stood in my doorway for 2 minutes and said, Daniel, I saw the video and I'm sorry nobody said something in the moment. And then he left. A pause. I've had 6 of those today. Different people, just stopping in. Emily felt something press against the back of her throat. Daniel, I'm fine, he said, quickly. Too quickly, which meant he wasn't entirely. It's just, I didn't expect that. I didn't expect people from here. I thought it would be strangers, the online people. I didn't think... He stopped. I didn't think the people I've lived next to for 20 years would show up like that, he finished. People are more decent than you give them credit for, Emily said softly. Yeah, he said. His voice had gone rough at the edges. Apparently, she heard him clear his throat once. I'm going to finish the Silverado, he said. I'll be home by 7. I'll make dinner. Okay. Daniel. Yeah. Sunday is the day after tomorrow, she said. I know, he said. You ready? A long pause. Longer than usual. The kind of pause that contained more thought than most people's paragraphs. I don't know what ready looks like for something like this, he said. But yeah, I'm ready. Saturday passed in a controlled kind of tension, the way the day before something large always does. Emily did 3 interviews, 2 by phone, 1 on video, and handled each one the same way she'd handled everything since Tuesday, directly, specifically, without performance. She said what happened. She said what she knew about Daniel. She let the facts do the work that outrage would have done less well. Daniel came home from the shop at noon on Saturday, because he'd told his customers he was closed in the afternoon, which he almost never did on a Saturday. He didn't explain to Emily why. He just came home and ate lunch and sat in the living room for a while, reading a paperback novel with the particular focused contentment of a man determined to have a few hours that belonged only to him. She left him to it. At 3 o'clock he put the book down and looked at her across the room. What time does William say they'll arrive? He asked. Sunrise, she said. He said they'd be entering the town limits right around sunrise. Daniel nodded. Then we should be there. Where? Town Square, he said. Same place. He held her gaze. I'm not meeting them at the edge of town like I need an escort. I'm standing where it happened, and they can come to me. She understood that. The geometry of it mattered, not to make a point, not for show, but because there was a rightness to it that Daniel's internal sense of things required. The same place, the same ground, standing on it, not running from it. Okay, she said. Town Square at sunrise. Wear something warm, he said. Montana mornings. She almost laughed. I know what Montana mornings are, Daniel. I've lived here as long as you have. The ghost of a smile. Yeah, you have. He picked up his book. She went back to the kitchen. That evening, Marcus Webb texted her. You should know there are camera crews coming into town. 3 that I know of, probably more by morning. Whatever happens Sunday, it's not going to be private. She texted back. I know, that's fine. He wrote, Is Daniel okay with that? She thought about that question for a moment. Then she wrote, Daniel has been okay with who he is his whole life. The cameras are the other people's problem. Marcus wrote back, I'm going to use that as a quote if that's all right. She smiled at her phone. Use it, she wrote. She didn't sleep much that night. Not from fear. Not from anxiety exactly. From something that didn't have a clean name, the particular wakefulness that comes when you know that something is about to happen that cannot be undone. that will become part of the permanent record of your life, that will exist as a before and after, whether you're ready for it or not. Daniel slept. Of course he did. She lay beside him in the dark and listened to him breathe and thought about the morning and thought about 600 people who were right now on the road or already parked somewhere nearby, having driven through Friday night and Saturday in an act of loyalty so specific and so concrete and so utterly without theatrics that it still made her chest feel too full to breathe normally. She got up at 4:30. She wasn't going to sleep, and she knew it. She made coffee. She stood at the kitchen window. She thought about Richard Caldwell asleep somewhere in this town, not yet knowing what Sunday morning was going to bring. She thought about the Moore family. She thought about Thomas Greer, the army sergeant, who'd said some debts don't need a reason. She thought about the 6 men who had come by Daniel's shop on Friday just to stand in the doorway and say, "I'm sorry." Nobody said something. At 5:15, Daniel came downstairs. He looked at her standing at the window with her coffee, and he said nothing, just went and poured his own and came to stand beside her. They stood together in the quiet kitchen for a while. Then he said, "You ready?" "No." "Oh," she said honestly. "Good," he said. "Neither am I. Let's go." They drove to the town square in the dark, arriving just before 6. The square was empty when they got there, or nearly a few camera crews were already setting up, which meant the news had traveled further and faster than even Emily had tracked. She saw a van with a network affiliate logo. She saw 2 men with professional cameras, and another with a boom mic, talking quietly near the fountain. She saw a police cruiser parked at the edge of the square with its lights off, just sitting there, which could mean anything. Daniel looked at the cruiser. "You think they're going to try to stop it?" Emily asked. "They can't stop it," Daniel said. "Public road, public space. You can't tell 600 law-abiding citizens on legal vehicles that they can't travel through a town." He paused. "They know that. They're here because someone told them to be here, and they're trying to figure out what their role is." They walked to the center of the square and stood there. Under the same sky where 1 week ago, a security officer had put his hand on Daniel Walker's collar and told him he didn't belong. The irony of standing in that exact square, waiting for the opposite of what had happened to him here. Emily felt it without needing to name it. A few townspeople began to arrive. Not many at first. A couple she recognized from the neighborhood. A man she knew worked at the post office. An older woman who Emily thought might be a retired schoolteacher. They came quietly without fanfare and stood at the edges of the square in the early morning cold, and they waited. More came. Then more. By 6:30, there were perhaps 80 people standing in and around the square. By 6:45, closer to 150. People who had seen the video, people who had read Marcus's article, people who had been sitting with something uncomfortable in their chests for a week and had decided that Sunday morning was the moment to show up and say so without words. Daniel stood in the center and said nothing. He didn't work the crowd. He didn't make conversation. He just stood there in his jacket with Emily beside him, and he waited, and the waiting itself was its own kind of statement. At 6:52, Emily heard it. Distant at first. A sound she couldn't immediately identify, something below the threshold of music and above the threshold of wind, something that you felt in your chest before your ears fully processed it. The woman standing nearest to her. The possible retired schoolteacher turned and looked toward the main road with an expression of puzzlement. "What is that?" she said. Emily knew what it was. She reached over and took Daniel's hand. He had heard it too. She could tell by the way he had gone very still, not the controlled stillness of the plaza. Not the disciplined containment of a man managing his anger. A different stillness. The kind that comes over a person when something they were told would happen, but hadn't quite believed, has suddenly undeniably begun. The sound grew. It swelled the way. Real sound swells, not like a movie, where it arrives at exactly the right cinematic moment, but the way real things arrive unevenly, with gaps and surges and the particular organic quality of something that is alive and moving and coming closer. One motorcycle appeared at the end of the main road. Then 3 more. Then 10. Then they kept coming. The people in the square had turned now, all of them facing the road where the motorcycles were entering in organized rows, disciplined and steady engines running at a measured pace, that was nothing like aggression and everything like intention. 2 by 2. Then 4 wide, row after row. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Oh my God." Someone else said nothing. Just put a hand over their mouth. The camera crews were running not to get away, but toward the road repositioning, because they had set up for a different kind of moment, and this was something their cameras had not been angled to capture. One of the men with a professional camera sprinted across the square to find a better position. The boom mic operator was on his phone, and they kept coming. 10, 20, 50. The sound had become something total by now. Not noise exactly, though it was loud, but presence. The physical presence of hundreds of engines in a confined space. The particular resonance of that. The way it moved through walls and chests, and settled in the base of the skull as something impossible to ignore. 100. 150. Daniel's hand tightened on Emily's. She looked at him. His jaw was set. His eyes were forward, watching the road, watching the rows of riders coming in. And on his face was an expression she had never quite seen before in 23 years. Not pride exactly, not relief, not happiness. Something more complex and more private than any of those. Something that lived in the territory between overwhelming gratitude and the desperate quiet determination not to let it show too much. He was not entirely successful. She saw his throat move. Once. She looked back at the road. 200. The townspeople around them had gone completely silent. Not the polite silence of a church. The involuntary silence of people who have just been confronted with something that their prior framework for understanding the world cannot fully accommodate. The woman who had asked, "What is that?" was standing with both hands clasped in front of her, watching with wide eyes and no expression that Emily could read. The man from the post office had taken his hat off, which seemed like the right instinct, even if he might not have known why he was doing it. 300. The police cruiser that had been parked at the edge of the square had not moved. Through the windshield. Emily could see the officer inside. He was watching. His radio was in his hand. He was not using it. Then, at the front of one of the center rows, a motorcycle slowed and pulled slightly ahead of the others. The man riding it was broad and white-bearded and moved carefully because of a knee that hadn't healed right, and he guided his bike with the ease of someone who had been doing this for 40 years and knew exactly how much attention it required and how much it didn't. William Carter stopped his motorcycle 20 feet from where Daniel and Emily stood. He cut the engine. Behind him, like a wave, following a stone dropped in water. The sound diminished row by row, section by section as riders followed his lead. Not all at once, but progressively, the engines cutting in sequence until the last one fell silent, and the town square of Red Valley, Montana, was filled with 600 motorcycles and 600 people who had driven through 2 states, or 3 or 5 to be here. And the silence that replaced the engines was the loudest thing Emily Walker had ever heard. William Carter got off his bike. He moved to where Daniel was standing. The 2 men looked at each other. Emily let go of Daniel's hand. William said something, low enough that she didn't hear it. She wasn't meant to. Whatever it was, Daniel looked at the ground for a moment. Then he looked back up. And he said something back. Also quiet. Also not for anyone else. Then William Carter reached into the inside of his own jacket and produced something folded. Something that Emily didn't immediately recognize. And when he unfolded it, she understood. It was Daniel's jacket. Not Daniel's jacket. Daniel was wearing his jacket. But it was the same jacket. A second one. New, or nearly, the patches crisp and the leather, without the particular worn softness that Daniel's had accumulated over 12 years. William held it for the moment, looking at it. Then he said clearly enough for the people nearby to hear, "This was made for you. 12 years ago you put one on, and you wore it the way it's supposed to be worn. Not as a symbol, not as a costume, as a promise." He looked at Daniel. "They tried to tell this town that the jacket was the problem. That you were the problem. That what you stand for and who you are was something people needed to be protected from." His voice was level and unhurried, and carried the particular authority of a man who has said difficult things for a long time and has learned to say them without decoration. We're here because we want them to understand what this jacket actually means. He held it out. Daniel didn't take it immediately. He stood looking at it for a moment, and Emily understood watching him that this was not hesitation. This was the opposite of hesitation. This was a man taking the full weight of a moment before he stepped into it. He reached out. He took the jacket. He didn't put it on. He turned to Emily first. He looked at her with an expression that said everything he would not say out loud in front of a crowd, the thank you that lived deeper than words, the acknowledgement of everything she had done in the past 7 days. The recognition that none of this was possible without the choice she had made on Saturday night when she'd picked up her phone and decided the world should see what had happened. She nodded once. He turned back. He put the jacket on over the one he was already wearing, layering them the way you layer something that means something over something that means something, doubling the weight of it. And then he stood there in the center of the Red Valley Town Square in 2 Hells Angels jackets in front of 600 riders and 150 townspeople and 4 camera crews and a police officer who was still sitting in his cruiser with his radio in his hand and not using it. The crowd did not cheer. It was not that kind of moment. It was quieter than that. More total. The kind of moment that doesn't need sound to be understood. William Carter turned and faced the townspeople gathered at the edges of the square. He was not a man who made speeches. Everything in his bearing said so. But he spoke. "We're not here to frighten anyone," he said. "We're not here because we're angry. We came because someone in this town decided that they knew who Daniel Walker was before they ever shook his hand, before they ever asked him a question, before they looked at anything beyond what he wore." He paused. "That's a mistake people make about a lot of us. We're used to it. But being used to it doesn't make it right." He let that sit. Daniel Walker fixed motorcycles for veterans who couldn't afford it. He helped families that had nowhere else to turn. He did it quietly without looking for recognition, because that's what people do when they actually care about something. They do it without the audience. He looked at the crowd. "You live in the same town as this man. You have for 20 years. I'm asking you to ask yourselves what you know about him. What you actually know, not what you assumed." A woman in the crowd, middle-aged in a heavy coat, had started crying. She wasn't doing it obviously. She was just standing there with tears moving down her face and not wiping them the way people cry when something has touched something they weren't expecting to feel. The man from the post office still had his hat in his hand. The retired schoolteacher had her hand pressed flat against her sternum over her heart without seeming to know she was doing it. And then something happened that Emily had not anticipated. Someone in the crowd started to clap. Not performance applause. Not the automatic response of an audience given a cue. Someone started clapping the way people clap when they have nothing else. When the moment has exceeded the capacity of standing still, when the body needs to do something with what it's feeling, and the only available option is to bring the hands together. And then someone else joined. And someone else. And within 30 seconds, the entire crowd of townspeople, all 150 of them, the neighbors, and the post office worker, and the school teacher, and the people who had watched the video, and felt bad, and come down to the square in the early morning cold, without quite knowing why, were clapping. Not uniformly, not perfectly, but genuinely the way crowds do when something real has happened in front of them, and they need to say so. The 600 riders did not clap. They stood with their bikes, and their colors, and their particular stillness, and they let the townspeople make that noise. Because this, William Carter understood, was not about the riders. This had never been about the riders. The riders were a mirror. They were a demonstration. They were the physical, undeniable 600-engine answer to the question of what Daniel Walker was worth. The answer apparently was this. Daniel stood in the center of it all with 2 jackets on his back, and Emily's hand back in his and his face doing the thing it had been doing all morning, carrying more than it usually let show, wearing the full weight of what was happening without flinching, without looking away. He did not cry. He came close. But he did not cry. Because this was not a sad moment. It was not a grateful moment exactly either. It was something that doesn't have a clean category, the moment when the world corrects itself. When the thing that was said about you, the wrong thing, the dismissive and cruel and small thing gets answered not by words, but by the physical presence of hundreds of people who traveled through the night to stand in your corner because they believed in the truth of who you are. It took Emily a long time to speak. When she finally did, she leaned slightly toward Daniel and said very quietly, just for him, "They came." He squeezed her hand. "Yeah," he said, "just that, just yeah." But the way he said it carried everything. What happened next did not happen slowly. The crowd began to move not away, but toward. Townspeople who had been standing at the edges began to drift forward, tentative at first, then less so. They approached riders. They said things. "Thank you for coming. This meant something to us. I'm ashamed of what happened here. I want you to know not everyone in this town thinks that way." And the riders who had been still and professional and organized became human. They shook hands. They introduced themselves. One of them, a large man in his 40s with a beard and an easy smile, got into a conversation with the man from the post office that lasted 20 minutes and ended with both of them laughing about something Emily couldn't hear. A young woman who had come down to the square, who couldn't have been more than 25, walked up to William Carter and said, "Excuse me, are you the one who organized this?" William looked at her. "I made some phone calls." "I'm a student at the community college," she said. "I've been following the story. I want to be a journalist. Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead," he said. "Why did you come? I mean, why was this worth it? The distance, the time, the gas, all of it. Why did this specific thing make you feel like you had to be here?" William looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Because nobody should have to be alone when someone treats them like they don't matter." She wrote that in her notebook with her pen moving fast and her face intent, with the specific concentration of someone who has just heard something they will be turning over in their mind for a long time. He watched her write it and said, "You'll be a good journalist." She looked up. "How do you know?" "Because you asked why," he said. "Most people ask what." Emily was watching that conversation from across the square, and she didn't hear a word of it, but she watched it happen, and she felt it from the outside. The way you feel? Sunlight from inside. A cold room as warmth filtered through something solid, but still reaching you. She turned to find Daniel. I was talking to two writers. She didn't know one from Colorado, apparently one from Wyoming. She could tell by the easy back and forth of their body language that they'd met before, or at least had people in common. That particular conversational shorthand of men who share a world, even if they don't share a history. Then she saw something that stopped her completely. Richard Caldwell was standing at the far edge of the square. He had not come close. He was standing at the edge of the crowd, or what had been the edge of the crowd before it shifted and expanded as the morning went on. He was in a good coat, the kind of coat that announced its price without trying. He was alone. His attorney wasn't with him. His council colleagues weren't with him. He was just standing there looking at the square, looking at the riders, she was almost certain looking at Daniel. She held his gaze when he turned and found her watching him. He didn't look away immediately, which surprised her. He stood there for a moment. And in that moment, across the crowd and the noise and the distance, Emily Walker looked at Richard Caldwell and felt something that surprised her with its completeness. Not triumph. She had expected triumph, and it wasn't that. Not anger. The anger had burned itself into something else over the past week, something more like recognition. The recognition of a moment that has arrived and cannot be taken back. The recognition that he was standing at the edge of something he had started and could not stop watching. It becomes something he had not imagined and could not control. He turned and walked away. She watched him go. Then she turned back to the square, to the 600 riders and the 150 townspeople, and the camera crews, and the young aspiring journalist writing in her notebook, and the man from the post office who was still talking to the bearded rider and laughing. And she let all of it exist as exactly what it was. Not a correction, not a punishment, not a vindication in any simple sense. A demonstration. A simple, undeniable 600-engine demonstration of what it looks like when people decide that one person's dignity is worth showing up for. The morning continued to open around them, The light changed the way light does in Montana. When the sun gets enough height to clear the peaks suddenly and completely, the quality of everything shifting at once. The square was bright now. The cold was still there but different. The kind of cold that makes things vivid rather than numb. Emily found William Carter standing near his bike. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her. He had a way of looking at people that was neither warm nor cold, just completely present. Like he had decided that you were worth his full attention and was simply giving it. "Daniel doesn't need thanks," he said. "I know," she said. "The thanks is from me, for him." He nodded once. "He's a good man, Mrs. Walker. The world is full of good men who get treated like they're not. Usually they stay quiet and the world never adjusts." He glanced across the square toward where Daniel was standing. "Your video changed the math on that." "The video was just the beginning," she said. "The beginning usually is," he said. She stood beside him for a moment. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now." He looked at the square, at the crowd and the riders and the cameras and all of it. "Now the story is already told. You can't untell it. The people who need to answer for what happened here." He paused. "They'll answer. That's how it works when the whole world is watching. And Daniel goes back to work Monday," William said simply. "Same shop, same truck, same jacket, same man he's always been." He looked at her. "The difference is that now the town knows who they've had living in it for 20 years. Emily nodded. She looked at her husband across the square. This man she had chosen and kept choosing every day for 23 years. This man who fixed motorcycles for veterans and never mentioned it, and helped families who had nowhere else to turn and never asked for recognition, and stood in a plaza while someone grabbed his jacket and chose not to fight and chose not to become what they expected him to be. She looked at him standing there in 2 leather jackets with the morning light on his face, and 600 brothers and sisters around him. And she thought, this is who you are. This has always been who you are. And now, everyone knows it. The cameras kept rolling. The story kept being told. And in Red Valley, Montana, on a Sunday morning, that nobody who was there would ever quite forget, the truth arrived. The way it sometimes does, not quietly, not gently, not through official channels or careful statements or private meetings in attorneys' offices. It arrived on 600 engines. It arrived loud enough to feel in the chest, and it was not going away. The riders left Red Valley the same way they came, in organized, disciplined, without theatrics. By 10 o'clock Sunday morning, the last motorcycle had cleared the town limits, and the square had returned to something resembling its ordinary self, except that it wasn't ordinary at all, and everyone who had been there understood that it never quite would be again. Emily and Daniel drove home in silence. Not the silence of people who have nothing to say, but the silence of people who have too much and know that none of it needs to be said right now. Daniel drove. She sat with her hands in her lap and watched the town move past the window, the storefronts, the side streets, the houses she had lived alongside for 2 decades, and she tried to locate herself inside what had just happened. She couldn't quite. Some things are too large to see clearly when you're standing inside them. They got home. Daniel made eggs. She made toast. They ate at the kitchen table, and the only thing either of them said during the meal was Daniel asking if she wanted more coffee and her saying yes. When they finished, he pushed back from the table and said, "I'm going to take a walk." She looked up. "You want company?" He thought about it. "Not yet." "Okay." He put on the jacket, his jacket, the original, the 12-year one, and he went out. She watched through this window as he walked down the front path and turned left on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets. No destination. She could identify just moving. Just needing to be somewhere that wasn't the center of anything. She understood that. She cleaned up the dishes. Then she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and her coffee, and she began to read everything that had been written about the morning. There was a lot. More than she'd expected, even given how much she'd been tracking. 3 network affiliates had run footage from the square. 2 national newspapers had pieces posted online. The documentary producer from New York had sent an email at 8:52 while the writers were still in the square that said simply, I've been watching the live stream. I've never seen anything like this. When you're ready to talk, I'm here. Marcus Webb's newspaper had updated his original article 3 times since Sunday morning with developing information about the civil rights investigation. Laura Bennett's office had issued a brief statement confirming that the investigation was ongoing and that additional witness statements had been collected over the past week. The statement was careful and official and said very little, but what it said was enough. The investigation was real. It was moving. And it had teeth. The Moore family had given a follow-up interview to a Missoula reporter. Emily read it carefully. They were measured and specific, and their words landed with the weight of people who had been waiting a long time to say things they had been told weren't worth saying. The matriarch of the family, a 71-year-old woman named Clara Moore, said, "We lost that property because we didn't know how to fight someone like Richard Caldwell. Most people don't. That's how he stays in power. Most people don't know how until it's too late." Emily read that sentence twice. Most people don't know how until it's too late. She thought about all the things that had happened in the past week that Richard Caldwell had not accounted for. The video going to 4 million, then 6, then climbing past 10 by Sunday afternoon. Marcus Webb and his 3 years of waiting. Laura Bennett's office and their decision that this particular case was worth the resources. The Moore family and their willingness to be named. The 600 riders and William Carter, and the moment in the square when the engines cut and the silence was louder than the sound. He had not accounted for any of it. Because men like Richard Caldwell Emily was beginning to understand operated on the assumption that the people they dismissed would stay dismissed. That the person who got pushed out of a public event would go home and be angry and tell a few friends and then move on. That the video would get some views and people would be upset for a news cycle, and then the next thing would happen and everyone would move on. He had not accounted for the jacket. Not the literal jacket. The truth behind it. The years it represented, and the people who understood those years, and the loyalty that those people carried so completely and so quietly that the world tended not to see it until it showed up in 600 rows of motorcycles on a Sunday morning. Daniel came home from his walk an hour later. He came in through the back door and stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her for a moment. "You've been reading," he said. "I have." "How bad?" "For him, very." He nodded slowly, came in and poured himself water. "What's the investigation doing?" Bennett's office issued a statement. "The investigation is active. More witnesses." He leaned against the counter. "The Moore family." On the record full interview, Clara Moore by name. Something moved in his face. "Clara Moore is 71 years old," he said. "She's been in this town longer than Caldwell has. She watched him take that property, and she had no way to fight it." He set down the glass. "I'm glad she's talking." "She is. She's very clear." "She always was," he said. "I did some work for her son about 8 years ago. She brought me a pie to say thank you. I told her she didn't need to do that. She told me that nobody does anything they don't need to do, and that the pie meant she was grateful, and I should let her be grateful." Emily smiled despite herself. "She sounds like someone I'd like." "You would," Daniel said. "You're the same kind of person." She looked at him. He meant it as a compliment, and she received it as one, and neither of them elaborated on it because they didn't need to. "Caldwell's attorney called again," she said. "While you were walking, he left a message." Daniel's expression didn't change. "What did he say?" "That Mr. Caldwell would like to arrange a statement. A public statement. Addressing what happened." A pause. "Arranged how?" "How wasn't specific. The attorney said Caldwell would be willing to do a press conference or a written statement, whichever Emily preferred." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Whichever Emily preferred," he repeated slowly. His exact words. "He knows you're driving this," Daniel said. "He's known that since Wednesday," she said. "And now he wants to give you the format because he thinks it makes him look cooperative." He thought about it. He still doesn't get it. "What do you mean?" "He thinks this is about the format, about what kind of statement he issues and how it's packaged and whether it makes him look like he took responsibility or was coerced into it." Daniel shook his head. He doesn't understand that the story isn't his to manage anymore. It stopped being his to manage the moment 600 people drove here from 11 states. Emily leaned back in her chair. So what do I tell the attorney? Tell him whatever Caldwell has to say, he should say it publicly. No arrangements, no format negotiations, no choreography. He met her eyes. If he has something real to say, the forum will take care of itself. She nodded, picked up her phone, texted the attorney exactly that. The response came back 4 minutes later. Understood. Mr. Caldwell will be in touch directly. She showed Daniel the screen. Directly, he said. Apparently. That's new, he said. It was new. And it told them both something. The call came Monday morning. Not from the attorney. From Caldwell himself. His number showed up on Emily's phone at 9:17, and she stared at it for 3 full rings before answering, because she needed those 3 rings to decide what version of herself was going to pick up. She answered, Mrs. Walker. His voice was different. Not the polished television voice. Not the careful public reasonableness. Something rawer and less managed. Something that had been worn down by a week of consequences and had lost some of its professional finish. This is Richard Caldwell. I know, she said. A pause. I wanted to call you myself, not through Aaron. Another pause. I owe you that much. She said nothing. She let the silence work for her. I've been thinking about what happened, he said. What I said, what I let happen. His voice had the halting quality of a man speaking without a script, for possibly the first time in a long time. I told myself I was protecting the community. I told myself that was a reasonable position. He stopped, started again. I've been telling myself that for a week, and I can't make it feel true anymore. Emily pressed her hand flat on the table. Steady. She kept her voice even. What changed? She asked. Sunday morning, he said immediately. Watching those people come into this town, not to fight, not to cause trouble, just to stand next to someone they believed in. A pause. I couldn't. He stopped again. She heard him breathe. I stood at the edge of that square, and I watched all of it, and I kept thinking about what I'd said on television. About a lifestyle. About choices. His voice dropped. That man fixed motorcycles for veterans for free. He helped families that had nothing. He's been doing that for 20 years in my town, and I called it a lifestyle. Emily was very still. What do you want from me? She asked. Not harshly, genuinely. I don't know what you'll accept, he said. I know what I owe. I owe a public apology. A real one, not a statement run through attorneys. I owe it to Daniel directly. I owe it to the families. He stopped. The Moore family, the others. I know about the investigation. I know what Marcus Webb found. A long pause. I'm not going to fight it. That landed differently than she'd expected. You're not going to fight the investigation, she said. No. Or the civil rights case. No. She sat with that. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the one who held the line, he said simply. Your attorney. I mean, you didn't have an attorney. You were the attorney. You answered the calls, and you made the decisions, and you didn't take any of the exits I gave you. Another pause. I've dealt with a lot of people over the years who had legitimate complaints and took the settlement because it was easier. You didn't. Daniel didn't want a settlement, she said. He wanted the truth. I know that now, Caldwell said. I should have known it then. She thought about Clara and her property sold at 40% below market. She thought about the families Marcus had found. She thought about the security officer's hand on Daniel's collar, and the careful television smile, and the press conference, and the way Caldwell had stood at the edge of the crowd on Sunday morning, and watched, and then turned and walked away. You walked away Sunday, she said. When you were watching from the edge of the square, you saw all of it, and you walked away. A very long pause. I couldn't stay, he said. I couldn't stand there and watch it and keep believing the things I'd been telling myself, and I wasn't ready to stop believing them yet. But now you are, she said. Now I don't have a choice, he said. And then before she could respond, I don't mean that the way it sounds. I'm not apologizing because I have to. I'm apologizing because Sunday morning showed me something that I can't unsee. What did it show you? I was quiet for a moment. What community actually looks like, he said. Not the version I've been running for 20 years. What it actually looks like when people show up for each other without being organized or incentivized, or without any reason except that they think it's right. He let that sit. I've spent 20 years building a version of this community that runs on relationships and leverage and quiet understandings between people with power. And 600 strangers just drove in from 11 states and showed this town something that my version never could. Emily said nothing. I'm going to call Daniel, Caldwell said. If he'll take my call. She thought about that. About Daniel at the shop right now, working on whatever needed working on, wearing his jacket, doing what he always did. I'll tell him you're going to call, she said. What he does with that is his decision. That's fair, Caldwell said. Mr. Caldwell. She paused. Clara Moore, the Moore property. That needs to be part of whatever comes next. A beat. I know, he said. I'm talking to my attorney about that today. She almost said something. She almost pushed further. Then she stopped herself because there was a difference between accountability and punishment, and she had never been interested in the second one. Daniel had said it himself, the point wasn't to see someone destroyed. The point was for consequences to make things mean something. Then talk to your attorney, she said, and call Daniel when you're ready. She hung up. She sat for a long time in the quiet kitchen. Then she called Daniel. He picked up on the second ring. Shop sounds in the background. The familiar orchestra of his working life. Yeah, he said. Caldwell is going to call you, she said. A very long pause. Is he? Daniel said. He called me first, directly, not through the attorney. She paused. He sounds different. Different how? She thought about how to say it. Like a man who watched something Sunday morning that he couldn't explain away, she said, and spent the night trying and failing. Another pause. What does he want? To apologize, she said. To you directly. He also said he's not going to fight the investigation or the civil rights case. The shop sounds continued in the background. A compressor cycling. Something being set down. What about the Moore family? Daniel asked. I brought it up. He said he's talking to his attorney about it today. A sound that contained more than it expressed. Daniel, you don't have to take his call. I know. You don't owe him the opportunity to feel better about himself. I know that too. A pause. But that's not the only reason to take a call, Em. She waited. Sometimes you take the call because the other person needs to say the thing, he said. Not for their sake. Because the thing needs to be said. Because leaving it unsaid, it sits in the world like something unfinished, and I'd rather finish it. She closed her eyes briefly. Okay, she said. Tell him he can call, Daniel said. After 5. I'll be done by 5. She called Caldwell's attorney because she still didn't have Caldwell's direct number. He had called from a blocked line and left a message. Daniel Walker will take a call from Mr. Caldwell after 5 o'clock this evening. The response again through the attorney understood. Thank you. The afternoon moved. Emily did 2 more interviews. She talked to Laura Bennett's office, which had a procedural question about the timeline of events on Saturday. She texted Marcus Webb 3 times about developments in the Moore story. She ate lunch standing at the counter because she forgot to sit down. At 3:15, her phone rang with a number she recognized: Thomas Greer, the Army sergeant, the one who'd been quoted in Marcus's article. Mrs. Walker, he said. His voice was the particular baritone of a man who had spent years giving orders and had learned to soften the edges of it in civilian life. I hope I'm not interrupting. You're not, she said. What is it? I wanted to let you know something, he said. I've been talking to some of the other veterans, the ones Daniel helped over the years. We've been talking as a group about what we want to do. A pause. We'd like to make a statement. Not for the investigation, though we'll cooperate with that. A separate statement. About who Daniel Walker is and what he's meant to us. Emily put her hand over her mouth for a moment. Just a moment. How many of you? She asked. Currently 14, Greer said. I expect more by the time we're done. 14 veterans, on record, willing to describe in specific terms what Daniel Walker had done for them. The free repairs, the late nights, the bikes he'd kept running, so men who needed the freedom of the road had access to it. The quiet human presence he'd provided to men who sometimes found human presence difficult to navigate after the things they'd seen. Sergeant Greer, she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. Ma'am, he said. Just that. Acknowledgement. Understanding. The language of two people who know they're inside something important and don't need to perform around it. Does Daniel know you're doing this? She asked. No, Greer said. We'd like it to be. We'd like to tell him ourselves. If that's all right with you. That's completely all right with me, she said. We'll be in touch about the timing, he said. Thank you, Mrs. Walker, for posting that video. Thank you for picking up the phone, she said. She sat with the phone in her hand for a long time after he hung up. 14 veterans. Caldwell not fighting. The Moore family on record. The investigation open and moving. Marcus Webb, still writing. 600 people who had driven through the night and stood in the square, and then driven home, and gone back to their lives, having done the one thing that was needed, without being asked to do anything else. She thought about what it would have looked like if she hadn't posted the video. If she'd done what Caldwell had assumed, she would do what most people would have done. Gone home, been angry, told a few friends, let it subside. Let the laughter and the grabbing and the television dismissal just sit in the world. Like so many other things that sit in the world, because no one held the thread long enough to pull. She thought about Daniel sleeping through Saturday night before she posted it. Peaceful and unperturbed, having made his peace with something she hadn't made her peace with yet. She was glad she hadn't slept. Daniel called at 5:40. He called, Daniel said. How was it? A pause. Not a searching pause. A settling one. The pause of a man who has had an experience and is locating where to put it. He apologized, Daniel said. Not the television apology, not the attorney version. Just he said what he did specifically. He said why it was wrong specifically. He didn't try to make it smaller than it was. Did you believe him? She asked. Yes, Daniel said without hesitation. I believed him. That's enough. It's not nothing, he said. It's not everything. Clara Moore's property needs to come back or the money does, and that's not his apology to fix alone, that's the investigation's work. The other families too. An apology to me doesn't close those accounts. He paused. But he knows that. He said as much. He did, Emily confirmed. Then it's a start, Daniel said. That's all it is, a start. She heard something shift in the background. The familiar sounds of the shop being closed for the day, the lights clicking off in sequence, the doors being checked, the particular final sound of a man ending a workday that he intends to repeat tomorrow. I'm coming home, he said. I'll make dinner. Yeah. Thank you, he said. For not accepting the settlement. For not letting it go. For all of it. I told you, she said. It's ours to carry. Both of us. I know, he said. But you carried most of it this week. She didn't argue. Come home, she said. On my way. The following Tuesday, Laura Bennett's office released a fuller statement. Emily read it at her kitchen table with Daniel standing behind her, one hand on her shoulder, reading over her head. The statement was 4 paragraphs. It confirmed that the investigation had found credible evidence of civil rights violations at the charity event. It named the organization behind the event, Caldwell's Civic Association, as the responsible party. It outlined the specific violations, the discriminatory removal request, the physical contact without justification, the pattern of conduct that targeted Daniel Walker on the basis of his expressive association. It noted that the organization had chosen not to contest the findings. The 4th paragraph was the one that landed differently than the rest. It read, Chief Investigator Laura Bennett stated that the events in Red Valley represent a pattern the division has observed in other communities, the treatment of visible symbols of association as proxies for criminality, particularly when those symbols are worn by individuals who have demonstrated sustained civic contribution. The investigation found no evidence of any conduct by Mr. Walker that could reasonably be characterized as threatening or disruptive. The evidence indicated only that Mr. Walker attended a community event, attempted to participate peacefully, and was subjected to discriminatory removal on the basis of what he wore. Daniel, read the last sentence twice. Sustained civic contribution, he said, quietly, not sarcastically, just turning the phrase over. That's what they call it, Emily said. I call it showing up, he said. Same thing, she said. He squeezed her shoulder once and went to pour more coffee. The statement circulated quickly. Marcus Webb had a piece up within 2 hours, pulling the specific legal language and walking his readers through what it meant practically. The national outlets picked it up by afternoon. By evening, Caldwell's Civic Association had lost 4 more sponsors, including one that had been with them for 11 years. The Moore family called Emily directly that evening. Not the son, Clara Moore herself. Her voice was 80 years old and fully intact. Mrs. Walker, she said, I wanted to let you know that Mr. Caldwell's attorney contacted us today. Emily sat up. And they're proposing a settlement, Clara Moore said. For the property. Full market value as of the date of sale plus interest. Emily closed her eyes. Clara, she said. I'm so glad. I want you to know something, Clara said. I want to tell you this directly. We tried to fight this for 3 years. We talked to people. We wrote letters. We hired a local attorney who told us we had no case. A pause. What changed everything was Daniel Walker's jacket. Emily said nothing, just listened. Not the jacket itself, Clara said. What it represented. The fact that someone decided to treat a good man like a problem in public, and that his wife decided the world should see it, and that 600 people decided it was worth driving through the night to correct it. Another pause. Because of that chain of events, the story became big enough for my story to attach to it. That's the truth of it. We're getting justice because of a jacket and a video and a woman who didn't accept a settlement. You're getting justice because you deserved it, Emily said. You deserved it 3 years ago. Yes, Clara said simply. We did. But deserving something and getting it are different things. You helped close that gap, Mrs. Walker. Emily looked at the table, at the laptop and the coffee and the notepad where she'd been tracking things all week. At the ordinary objects of an ordinary kitchen that had been the command center of an unordinary week. Mrs. Moore, she said. Clara, I want to ask you something. When this is resolved, when the settlement is done and the investigation is closed and all the legal pieces have landed, will you and your family be okay? A brief silence. Then Clara Moore said, We'll be better than okay, Mrs. Walker. We're going to be fine. That should have felt like an ending. It felt like something else. It felt like a sentence in the middle of a paragraph, not the period at the end. Because Emily had been paying attention all week, and what she'd noticed under the headlines and the legal proceedings and the sponsor withdrawals and all the machinery of public accountability was something quieter. The 6 men who had come to Daniel's shop on Friday just to stand in the doorway. The woman at the edge of the square who had cried without wiping her tears. The post office worker with his hat in his hands. The young aspiring journalist writing fast in her notebook. The 14 veterans making a statement not for the investigation, but for themselves. The thing she'd noticed was that the story had loosened something in this town. Something that had been held in place by Caldwell's version of Red Valley, the version organized by relationships and leverage and quiet understandings, had shifted. Like a foundation, when one corner gives way, causing the whole structure to settle differently. People were talking, not online, in person, at the hardware store and the diner and the school pickup line. People who had watched the video were saying things to each other that they hadn't said before, about the way the town worked, about who got treated how and why, about whether that was something that could be different. Emily knew this because people told her. Strangers and neighbors, and people she half knew from years of living in the same place, who stopped her at the grocery store, or called the house, or knocked on the front door to say some version of the same thing I didn't know. I should have known. Something has to change. She told Daniel about it one evening. He listened in that way he had, taking it in without performing a response. "You're surprised?" he asked. "A little," she admitted. "People know when something is wrong," he said. "Usually they just don't know what to do about it. They're waiting for someone to create a door-shaped opening." He considered. That's what the video did. It made a door. "And 600 motorcycles walked through it," she said. "Rode through it," he said. And he was smiling. She laughed. The first real, uncomplicated laugh she'd had in 10 days. It surprised her with its ease. It felt good in the way that laughing with someone you love always feels good, simple and specific, and impossible to replicate with anyone else. "I love you," she said. "I know," he said. Same. Same, his word, his shorthand. The thing he said instead of "I love you," not because he didn't mean it, but because they had been together long enough that the vocabulary of their relationship had condensed into its most essential forms. She accepted it. Always had. Always would. Marcus Webb called on Wednesday to tell her that the story had been nominated for a regional journalism award. He sounded almost embarrassed about it, which she found endearing. "You didn't do this for an award," she said. "No," he said. "I did it because it was true and it mattered and nobody else was going to." "That's what journalism is supposed to be," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I keep being reminded of that this week." Laura Bennett called on Thursday morning. The formal and procedural voice was still there, but something underneath it had shifted slightly. A fractional warmth, the kind that surfaces in people who work difficult jobs when a case goes the way it should. "The investigation is formally concluded," Bennett said. "The findings are entered into the record. Caldwell's organization has accepted the findings and agreed to the remediation requirements." "What does that mean practically?" Emily asked. "Mandatory training for anyone overseeing public community events," Bennett said. "A formal code of conduct reviewed by our office for events held in public spaces. Independent oversight for 2 years." A pause. "And a public's acknowledgement of the findings, by Caldwell personally." "Public," Emily said. "Public," Bennett confirmed. "His choice of format, but it must be public on the record, and must specifically name Daniel Walker and acknowledge what was done to him." Emily was quiet for a moment. "Ms. Bennett," she said, "can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "When you opened this investigation, when you decided it was worth the resources, what made you decide that?" A pause. "The video," Bennett said. "Specifically the part of the video that your husband doesn't appear in." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" "The part where Richard Caldwell is visible in the frame in the background watching, doing nothing, and then about 43 seconds in smiling." A pause. "That's the part that made me decide." Emily had not noticed that. She had watched the video many times, and she had not noticed that. "He smiled," she said. "For approximately 2 seconds," Bennett said. "Then he went back to his drink. But yes, he smiled." Emily sat with that. With the particular weight of it. With the image of the man who had spent a week managing his response to the video, having been caught in the original moment, with the one expression he hadn't managed to control. "Thank you for telling me that," she said. "Thank you for posting the video, Mrs. Walker," Bennett said. "Cases like this need evidence. You gave us evidence." After the call, Emily went and found Daniel in the garage, where he was doing what he always did on a weekday morning, working. She stood in the doorway. He was underneath a truck, she could only see his boots. "Daniel," she said. "Yeah." His voice from under the truck. "Caldwell is making a public statement, formally, required by the investigation. He has to name you specifically and acknowledge what was done." A pause. The sound of something being tightened. "When?" he said. "I don't know yet. Soon." Another pause. "Okay," he said. "That's it. Just okay. What else would I say?" She leaned against the doorframe. Most people would want to watch it, or be there. "I'll be at work," he said. She blinked. "Daniel, I'm not going to stand there and watch a man perform accountability because he's required to," he said. "It happened or it didn't. The record shows it or it doesn't. I don't need to be in the room. She heard him set something down. I've got work. She stood there for a moment. You're a very strange man, she said. You've known that for 23 years, he said. I have, she said. I chose you anyway. Lucky me, he said. And she could hear that he was smiling. She left him to his truck. She went back inside. She sat at the kitchen table with the laptop and the coffee and the ordinary objects of their ordinary life, and she thought about everything that had happened in the 2 weeks since a security officer put his hand on her husband's collar in a public plaza in Red Valley, Montana. She thought about Caldwell's mandatory public statement. She thought about the Moore family and their settlement. She thought about 14 veterans making a statement nobody asked them to make. She thought about Marcus Webb's article and Laura Bennett's 4th paragraph, and the woman at the edge of the square who cried without wiping her face. She thought about 600 engines and the silence they made when they stopped. She thought about the jacket, about what it meant, about the promise William Carter had described in the square, the promise that no one who wore the colors would stand alone in the face of contempt. And she thought about something she hadn't had words for until now. About how the jacket was a promise, yes. But the video was also a promise. Her decision to post it to keep the phone charged and the calls answered and the settlements refused and the record clear, that was also a promise. A promise to the truth of who Daniel Walker was against the version of him that powerful people had tried to make stick. Both promises had held. She closed the laptop. She looked at the window. Outside Red Valley was doing what it always did, moving through its Tuesday or its Wednesday or its Thursday with the particular rhythm of a small town that is mostly ordinary, mostly decent, and mostly trying. People going to work, kids going to school, dogs walked and mail delivered and coffee made and all the 10,000 small things that constitute a community when a community is functioning the way it's supposed to. It wasn't a perfect town. It had never been. Caldwell's version of it, the one organized by leverage and quiet understandings, had done real damage to real people over real years, and that damage was not erased by a week of accountability. Clara Moore knew that. The other families knew that. Emily knew that. But something had shifted. A door had opened, and sometimes that's enough to start with. Sometimes the work of justice is not arrival, but direction, not the destination, but the first clear step toward it, taken in public on the record, in a way that cannot be quietly undone. She picked up her phone. Sent Daniel a text. Dinner at 7. The response came back in 40 seconds. Yeah, I'll be done by 6. She smiled, set the phone down, went to start dinner. The jacket was still hanging on its hook by the back door, where Daniel had put it when he went into the garage. The original one worn soft, 12 years of loyalty and work and quiet presence, stitched into the leather in ways no one could see from the outside. She paused beside it for a moment. She thought about everything it had cost to be that jacket and everything it had given back. Then she went to make dinner for her husband, who would be home by 6, who would eat and ask about her day and wash his own plate and put the jacket back on to take the trash out because that was who he was and who he had always been and who Red Valley, all of Red Valley, finally properly now knew him to be. 3 months passed the way time passes after something large, not quickly, not slowly, but differently. With a before and after built into every ordinary day. Daniel went back to work the Monday after the square. Same shop, same hours, same truck in the driveway at 6:15 every morning and home by 6 every evening. He didn't give interviews. He didn't appear on television. When a producer from a national morning show called the house, and Emily answered, she said she'd asked Daniel and called back 20 minutes later to say he appreciated the offer and wasn't interested. The producer said she understood, but that the audience would really respond to his story. Emily said his story was his life, and he was living it, which was the only response she intended to give. She hung up and went back to the kitchen and told Daniel. He looked up from the newspaper. Good, he said. You're not even a little tempted, she asked. By what? By telling it yourself, on a big stage, with a big audience. I thought about it for exactly as long as it deserved. No, he said. The story's already told. Adding more telling doesn't add more truth. She nodded. She had known that was what he'd say. She'd asked anyway because sometimes you need to hear a person's values spoken out loud to remember why you chose them. Caldwell made his public statement on a Thursday morning 6 weeks after the square. Emily watched it on her laptop. Daniel was at work. He stood at a podium without flanking council members. Without the careful smile. Without the polished television ease. He looked like a man who had rehearsed something and then decided in the moment to say something different, rougher, less managed, more real. He said Daniel Walker's name. He said what had been done at the event. He said it was wrong. He said the investigation's findings were correct. He said that he had spent years operating under assumptions about who deserved to be part of this community, and that those assumptions had caused harm to people who deserved better, not just Daniel, but the Moore family and others who had never received what they were owed. He did not cry. He did not perform remorse. He simply said the true thing clearly in public on the record. And then he stepped away from the podium. Emily sat with her coffee and watched the empty podium on her screen for a long moment after he walked away. Then she called Daniel. He picked up on the second ring. Shop sounds in the background. "He did it," she said. "I know," he said. "Marcus texted me." "Did you watch it?" "No," he said. "You?" "Yes." "Was it real?" he asked. She thought about Caldwell at the podium, about the absence of the smile, about the way he'd said Daniel Walker's name like it mattered. "Yeah," she said. "I think it was." A pause. "Good," Daniel said. "Then it means something." "It does," she said. She heard him set something down in the background. Then he said quietly, "It's done, isn't it?" She looked at the empty podium on her screen. At the cursor blinking in the browser window. At the ordinary Tuesday morning existing all around the extraordinary thing that had just happened in it. "Yeah," she said. "I think it's done." The twist nobody had seen coming arrived 2 weeks after Caldwell's statement in the form of a letter. Not a legal letter, not a formal document, a handwritten letter. 3 pages delivered to the shop in an envelope addressed to Daniel Walker, in careful, slightly shaky cursive. It was from the security officer. His name was Gary Hollis. He was 54 years old and had worked security jobs his whole adult life because it was what he knew and it paid enough. He had been terminated from the charity event organization the week after the investigation's findings were released. He was not appealing it. He wrote that he wasn't writing for sympathy and that he wasn't asking for anything. He wrote that he had watched the video of himself 3 times. That watching yourself do something wrong is a particular kind of education that nothing else quite provides. That he had told himself at the time he was protecting the event, protecting families, doing his job, and that watching the video had shown him frame by frame that he had been doing none of those things. He had been doing what powerful people often convince less powerful people to do, enforcing assumptions they hadn't chosen but had accepted without examination. He wrote that he had spent 20 years putting his hand on people who didn't deserve it, telling himself it was for order, and that Daniel Walker's stillness, the choice not to react, not to fight, not to become what the moment was trying to make him, had shown him the distance between the man he had been pretending to be and the man he actually was. He wrote, "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to know that I saw you. I saw who you are, and I'm going to spend whatever time I have left trying to be a little more like that and a little less like what I was in that plaza." Daniel read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of the jacket. Emily watched him do it. "You're keeping it," she said. "Yes," he said. "Why?" He thought about it. "Because it's the most honest thing anyone has written to me in a long time," he said. "And because it reminds me that people can change, even when you don't expect it, even when there's no particular reason for them to." She looked at him. This man, this jacket, this life they had built together in a town that had underestimated both of them, and she felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for months. Something that had been waiting for exactly this moment to finally come to rest. 14 veterans stood in Daniel's shop on a Saturday morning in November and read their statement aloud. Not to a camera, not to a journalist. To Daniel directly, because Thomas Greer had decided that's how it should be done, and the others had agreed. They took turns, each one reading a section, each one saying specifically what Daniel had done for them and what it had meant. Some of them stumbled. Some of them paused. One of them, a young man, not yet 30, who had come back from overseas with things he hadn't processed yet, stopped in the middle of his section and couldn't continue for a moment. Daniel waited without moving. Then the young man finished. When they were done, Daniel stood in the middle of his shop, surrounded by 14 men who had driven there that morning because they wanted him to know that his quiet, unremarkable, unrecorded work had mattered in ways that reached into the deepest and most private places of their lives. And he said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "Thank you, every one of you." That was all. It was enough. Because real power is not forcing people to fear you. Real power is having 14 veterans drive to your shop on a Saturday morning to tell you that the way you lived your life made a difference in theirs. Real power is 600 people on motorcycles who travel through the night because they believe in you. Real power is a wife who posts a video and refuses every exit and holds the line until the truth is so visible that even the people who denied it cannot look away. And real brotherhood, the kind stitched into the leather of a worn jacket that a man puts on every morning, not as a statement, but as a promise. Real brotherhood is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply shows up. In shops and kitchens and plazas and town squares, and the inside pocket of a jacket, where a handwritten letter from a man who finally saw himself clearly is folded and kept because forgiveness is real, and people are more than their worst moments, and the world is not finished becoming what it should be. Daniel Walker still works at the same shop. He still wears the same jacket. He still fixes motorcycles for veterans who can't afford it, and helps families that have nowhere else to turn, and he still doesn't mention it to anyone, because that is not why he does it. But Red Valley knows now, and knowing changed everything. The jacket was never just a jacket, it was a promise, and in Red Valley, Montana on a Sunday morning, that nobody who was there will ever forget that promise was kept.